Hello, and welcome to the Thinking Elixir podcast, where we cover the news of the community and learn from each other. My name is Mark Erickson.
And I'm David Bernheisel.
Let's jump into the news. First up, Saša Jurić published an updated GitHub project. It's the project that he used during his The Soul of Erlang and Elixir talk back from 2019. This talk it got a lot of attention because honestly, it's really good. It's a great talk to be able to highlight what the Beam can do. All Beam languages, they inherit this from the VM, which is process isolation, and how the Beam has its own scheduler and how you can have a misbehaving process and it doesn't kill or bog down your entire application. You can have errors in individual processes which don't crash the whole thing. It's a great talk. And so in his talk, he's using this application that he had developed to highlight this with little graphs and things showing it in action. So he's actually open sourced and made that project available. So he explained it saying, I've rewritten the demo of The Soul of Erlang and Elixir talk. The code now uses the latest Erlang, Elixir, and Phoenix. It is licensed MIT, so you can freely use it in your own demos or for any other purpose, which is very cool. That's something you can have fun with at a meetup, or if you're trying to demo something and really help your boss or manager get the idea of why this technology would be a great fit. And you don't want to have them sit in front of a whole presentation watching Saša's talk themselves. Being able to give something like this and be able to interact with it and say, see what this is doing, see, and explaining it. I think that's a great resource.
Yeah, and he's using LiveView here, which I don't remember history very well, but 5 years ago when he introduced the talk, was LiveView out?
I don't know.
I mean,
let's see. I used LiveView in the very early days before they had components or anything like that.
Right.
So it was probably.
I don't think. Okay, I'm gonna say LiveView wasn't out 5 years ago. I know it's like it feels recent, but then I'm always surprised when it actually came out. The newer code that Saša put in there is using like LiveView proper. Mm-hmm. It's also a pretty good example of using a live dashboard page.
Right.
So if you're curious of what that implementation looks like, that's in there as well. So he uses live dashboard as like your backend, right? Your administrative panel, and he's got a custom page there to look at, his demonstration essentially, right? And then there's a separate live view for doing the actual. In his talk, he does some impossible math, right? And that's what hoses things up. So that's also in a live view. Anyway, yeah, wonderful. Glad to see that he updated it.
Yeah, so we've got a link to the GitHub project and the talk. So if you haven't seen that talk, it's totally worth checking out and getting an idea of how this project demonstrates these concepts in the Beam and Elixir.
All right, so speaking of Phoenix LiveView, I got to look this up now when it was released. But speaking of Phoenix LiveView, we're not 1.0 yet, but we do have RCs out. And so there dropped a new RC. RC 8 is what we're on now. And it includes support for the new Heeks interpolation syntax. So we've talked about this a couple times in our news episodes, but remember there are two ways that you can interpolate Elixir into Heeks templates. There's the angle bracket %equals kind of, traditional EEX one. And then there's the curly bracket one that are used inside of components, like interpolating attributes onto your components. And so now Phoenix LiveView properly supports all of that syntax for interpolating variables inside of those tag bodies. Now that I'm saying that, of course it does, because that's where the Heeks engine is, and we've talked about it before, but it's now mentioned in the RC8. I guess now it's published is the point. Also, somewhat minor, but there's new support for a default attribute in the live title component. All right, this is one of those components you just kind of put in there and forget.
It's part of the generator, yeah.
Yeah. This is in your root layout, and this is the component that populates your title tag up, in the header, at the head of your document. This is what browsers show in the tab, right? If you fed in a nil value, it would just be nil. So you kind of have to or the result of the title assign that gets fed into there. And now there's now there is a default attribute that you can explicitly pass in there. While I was looking at the changelog, I noticed that the last RC also had a pretty interesting thing that I missed, RC7, and that was support for targeting inner and closest query selectors in JS commands. This is probably pretty helpful. So you can imagine that you're wanting to target, like where this, like if you're in a link and you had like a component that, you got the A tag that you currently are sitting on, but you want to change the style of like the group that surrounds it. Something along those lines, maybe a terrible example. You would usually have to do some kind of hook to capture, that event, and then go do the query selector stuff on your own, and it just ended up being a little bit tedious. It's an easy thing to do, but just you always have to drop back into JavaScript for that. Well, maybe not anymore. If you were doing that before, now you can just feed that directly into JS commands, and there's a little bit of it's a tuple syntax. So if you're looking to target a component and then say that it's the inner A tag, now you can do that, and you can target that particular thing, like you're targeting a thing with an ID and then something under it. Or I am currently a row, or I am currently a link inside of a row, and I want to change the style of my entire row. So I'll target a closest TR table row tag. Anyway, those are some small examples, but I think that's going to be pretty darn helpful for a lot of folks.
Yes.
One of those things that just, I don't have to write JavaScript anymore. I just put it in my Heeks templates now, and now I've got some conveniences. This is starting to feel a little jQuery-ish in how like how there's going to be a bunch of these little utilities to keep you from writing vanilla JavaScript. Just shorthanding a lot of common things that you do, which is what jQuery, like I feel like that's what jQuery did for a lot of folks. It's just more concise syntax for doing common things in JavaScript.
What I like with that JS command sequence of, because it's a whole sequence of things that you can compile together. So you can say, find my inner tag and then add a class. That's the kind of thing that I've struggled to do in the past. It's like I want some action to cause a class to be added down at a couple divs lower, and then something else, so like I have to find the class and then add a class or something like that. So being able to just embed that more expressively in the sequence of JS commands, I love that.
Yeah, not mentioned, but there's also some more support. Go check out the changelog. We'll have a link to it. But there's better support for JavaScript frameworks to hook into, like Phoenix hooks, and you can now put in your Phoenix hooks. You can put in what's the JavaScript word? You can put in promises. That's right. You can return promises now. Yeah, the Phoenix LiveView JS stuff will await that stuff now, just to be a little bit friendlier, to common JavaScript conventions. There's a lot more in the changelog, so go check it out.
And next up, ErrorTracker version 0.5.0 was released. If you remember ErrorTracker, it's the GitHub project, or it's a hex package actually, that you can add to your application, and it embeds error tracking into your application, which adds tables into your Postgres database to store them there. It gives you a route helper to be able to go to an admin page where you can view errors, mark them as resolved, things like that. That's what we're talking about. That had a new release. The release includes support for Ash applications, custom breadcrumbs, and better mobile experience, and other minor fixes. I've actually been using ErrorTracker in a personal application, and it's been really helpful. So if you haven't tried it out and you've got that project that you're tinkering on periodically, this is the thing to add it to. You could even add it to your production work full-time job application too. But it's a no-brainer if it's just like your own little side project. Be able to try this out. But what I wanted to share was that I had an error in a process. So it was like a live view or a gen server, and the error was like the whole state gets dumped, and it's huge. It's got all these nested structs and things like that. Completely unreadable. I can't see where the stack trace, the line number is of where this actually happened. It would become a difficulty of trying to pin down what caused this problem. And just adding this error tracker, which is really easy to add, then it actually catches those errors, logs them, and I've got the full thing with the stack trace and everything. And that's even just with local dev. It's even been a super help for me on local dev, which I was like, oh, this is an unexpected benefit. I'm really happy about this. And then yes, on production, it's the same thing. I really enjoyed it. If you haven't tried it and it sounds interesting, give it a try.
If any listeners find me at a conference, you should talk to me about errors and telemetry and logs and traces and metrics and all that kind of stuff. We'll have a fun discussion. Not to take away from ErrorTracker. ErrorTracker looks really great. All right. Hey, next up is some news about NX and Apple Silicon. If you are developing on a Mac and you're interested in machine learning, which is probably 90% of you, you might be interested in this new GitHub repo that they've published. It's called EMLX. It is not yet published to HexPM to give you some indication of how production ready it may be, but EMLX is an NX backend for MLX. And what is MLX? MLX is a NumPy-like array framework designed for efficient and flexible machine learning on Apple Silicon, brought to you by Apple Machine Learning Research. It's essentially Apple's version of EXLA.
Right.
XLA is the Google framework for all this machine learning stuff, and now MLX is the Apple framework because we live in a world where you can't just have one good thing. All the big corporations have to go publish their own version of things. So I tried it because I'm a Mac fiend, and I tried getting the Bumblebee Whisper model to work on it, but it didn't quite work on my first attempt. I ran into some type error. Basically, something was expecting a tensor, and I got a ref instead. And anyway, but it's again not published on Hex, so probably not super ready for any quality work right now, at the time of recording at least. But they are doing a lot of fast and furious work. I mean that in the good way, furiously good work, because you've got wickedly smart people working on this stuff. But very good milestone, I think, in the NX ecosystem to allow what I believe to be the majority of developers, probably not just on Mac hardware, but like the majority of consumer developers maybe probably working on Macs. This just opens up a whole wide array of ability and speed improvements on experimenting with machine learning models on consumer hardware. So that way you don't necessarily need to go and buy a GPU to get much, much faster evaluations and all that kind of stuff. So go try it out. And I'm sure by the time that we release this episode, there's probably a lot more improvements. I'll keep on trying out my Whisper model and see what happens. But yeah, it's published to Elixir-NX GitHub repo org. So that means it's official. And then it's EMLX, and we got a link in the show notes. So go check it out.
And next up, are you building a NIF and you would like to call some Elixir code from inside the NIF? Well, now you can using a library called nifcall. It's a package by Coco. So we've got a link to the GitHub project. And so typically, if you have a NIF, it's Elixir calling into a natively implemented function. So maybe it's Rust, maybe it's C, something else. It's outside the application, and you're wanting to call into that, presumably because it gives you access to hardware or it's faster evaluation for something that's very tight and important. But this particular project helps you go the reverse direction. So you've called into a NIF, and now the NIF needs to be able to execute a function in the Elixir application. So that's what this is enabling. I don't quite know the scenario where you would say, this is what I need. But if you have this problem, you need this solution.
And for some context, Coco is the person that helped develop eVision, so computer vision, which is obviously very much closer to the metal than what we're used to. So yes, Coco has a lot of great experience here. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm curious what they're doing with that. Yeah, I wonder if they're are they awaiting calls from Elixir to do something? Is this like a hook in there? I don't know. I'm gonna have to ask. I'm gonna get on Blue Sky. I'm gonna go chat it up with Coco and see what's up. I gotta understand this a little bit more. Okay, so total aside, I did look it up, and LiveView was released in 2019. It was so long ago, but I can't remember what month Saša gave his talk, because he also gave his talk in 2019, but what month? So which one came first? I don't really know.
Yeah, that's funny.
So if he did use LiveView, it was beta pre-release ever,
Bleeding edge,
LiveView.
yes.
Yeah, bleeding edge, like just released kind of stuff. So maybe that's what was happening. Man, I can't remember now. Wow, 5 years ago, well, coming on 6 years ago that LiveView was released, and we're still not at 1.0.
If you check out the change log for the RCs, there are so many improvements and bug fixes. It really feels like, okay, we want this to have more of the missing features that people are really looking for 1.0 and fixing all these issues that are really niggly things, like really edge case, like under this particular circumstance, it would not update on you if you hit the back arrow and you've done a patch, all that kind of stuff. So I really appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're saying you appreciate that they're not 1.0 yet because they're really sorting out all the stuff. Yeah.
I guess, I appreciate all the work that's going into getting this really polished. Now it does happen to be, they want it to be polished so they can have that stamp of, yes, now come use it. Now we have a high confidence. But yeah.
Right. I agree for what it's worth. I'm not shaming pre 1.0 yet, especially on a, industry changing kind of concept here. So I'm happy for it. All right. Well, hey, moving on. Zach Daniels shared his Elixir Conf EU talk about the Ash framework is now available on YouTube. Zach Daniels, creator of Ash Framework, he works at Alembic. He does a lot of consulting work for a lot of common things, and Ash is a declarative framework for just making those kinds of things simpler. That's the TLDR of what Ash is. And Zach gave an incredibly good, easy to follow talk about Ash and where it might be helpful for a lot of folks. And he titles his talk, The Story of a Function. And I really love it, right? Baby functions all the way to basically DSLs, which don't think of DSLs as a bad word here. This is just telling you why it's natural to progress to that kind of thing. And that's why Ash is the way it is and why it can be very helpful for a lot of folks. And so what he says is that he feels that this talk is probably the best one he's giving. I agree, where he's given in articulating why Ash exists and the types of problems it tries to solve. And that lots of folks come up to me saying specifically that they didn't get it before, but they do now. So if you've been struggling to get it, what is Ash about? This is the talk for you. So go check it out. He's given it at Elixir Conf EU and at Elixir Conf US before, I believe the last one. Not exactly a brand new talk, but new to YouTube. And this is probably his latest rendition of it. So so great talk. And also, Zach's just a great guy. I always love listening to him. Full of a lot of incredible ideas. So knowing that Ash is a pretty profound, code base that an ecosystem, of things that kind of work together. Aside, Zach Daniels also the creator of Igniter,
right? Yes.
Which is kind of born out of needs that they have. It's not necessarily for Ash, but it helps install or integrate Ash into things. But it's not about Ash. It can be anything. Right. If you recall, a couple of weeks ago, Dave Lucia even had like some live streams of trying to get telemetry stuff to install with an Igniter task. So anyway, very cool. Good talk. You should go check it out.
And next up, Jose Valim drew some attention to a new VS Code plugin for refactoring Elixir code. The plugin is called Refactorex, like Refactorex. It's by Gabriel, and he's a student at a university. It currently includes 29 built-in refactorings. So the GitHub project has a whole set of animated GIFs showing the refactorings in progress, so you can see what it's like. But then you can click on each individual item in the list and see a animated GIF of that refactoring being used. So this includes such bangers as extract function, rename function, extract a guard. So like you can take a guard and extract it into a private reusable function. Then you can like re-highlight that same guard and reverse it and say inline this guard into all the places it's used. You can introduce a pipe which unstacks nested function calls. You have a function where the first argument is the result of a function which passes it. You have that pattern and you can say, turn these into pipes and it'll just do that. Or you can reverse it and go the other direction. And many more, like the 29. And some of them are as simple as selecting some code and adding an IO inspect or removing an IO inspect or there's lots of stuff. I've already installed it. I've been playing with it. I haven't had refactoring features like this since I worked in C# using Visual Studio, the proper enterprisey thing. And I got to tell you, I love it. It's so nice to see and have these types of tools available.
My only regret is that it's in VS Code.
Yeah.
I don't use VS Code. But I do want to point out that so this is a very exhaustive list of refactorings, which is kind of interesting. One comment there you can reverse inline guards, so that feels like unrefactor, like defactor.
Yes. Yeah, it's like exactly. And what a lot of these things are reversible, right? So you can say, I want to select some code and extract this into a function. Oh, and then rename what that function is. And then you can then go back down to it and inline that function. It's like you're undoing it. So what it does is it makes it easy to just kind of refactor your code. Like, I think this might be good as pulling this out as a def guard. What would that look like? And then seeing it, no, I don't like it. So you could just hit, undo. But you can also, go later on. And it's like, let's undo that and just inline that. I think it just makes it a lot easier and lowers the bar for trying out a different type of refactoring and seeing what that's like.
Yeah, so this is an exhaustive list of refactorings, which is pretty nice. It's built for VS Code. Next LS, for what it's worth, Mitchell Handberg's LSP server, he has a Elixir Tools NeoVim plugin as well that also includes some refactorings. Not nearly as long. It's actually just three refactorings. Next LS includes a command for pulling out into an alias, a module out to an alias, right? And then transforming to or from the pipe syntax, like you mentioned earlier. So that includes that. But this one, Refactorex, definitely has a lot more. I'm wondering how much of this really needs to be about VS Code, though.
I know
how much of it can be in the LSP.
I agree.
Like is this going to be like a testing ground and then re-implemented in the LSP? Because LSPs have like the protocol for code actions. That could be, all of these could be code actions, I think, if I'm understanding things correctly. And then if it's in the LSP, any editor can use it,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Me not having done any work on an LSP or creating a Visual Studio Code extension, like not having done any of that, I'll just put on my little hat, like I pretend I know what I'm talking about.
I always have that hat on.
And saying, yes, it seems like having figured out how these things can be done well could be put into a more reusable, into the LSP itself and being used across editors. So yes, there's definitely hope for that.
Yeah. Well, VS Code is definitely the most popular editor out there. So very happy to see that. Very cool extension. Also very impressive that it's a student at university that's developing all that, which is pretty great. And on top of that, man, what GitHub project has an animated GIF for every single thing that you can do there? Like, what a good way to just explain that. So if for nothing else, an awesome README.
True.
All right. Hey, last up, rounding up the news. Advent of Code season is upon us. By the time you hear this, we're a week into it. Advent of Code is, if you haven't heard of it, is a way of trying out and practicing, for about, is it 30 days or 25 days? For the month of December, at least, to try out a programming language and going through a series of exercises. And these exercises have personalized inputs and results for you, so it's hard to share, that kind of stuff. It's a very creative and good way to really engage in the learning process of your preferred language or selected language. There's a lot of great boilerplates out there too, because a lot of these you go download your input set, and then you might want to wrap it up in a test or something and get that all read quickly, so you're not dealing with that every single exercise. We'll have some links to some of those good boilerplates. They basically carry from year to year. Just a good reminder on that. But I think that would be a good time if you, dear listener, are listening to us because you're curious about Elixir and you haven't really written Elixir. Now's a great time to go try it out. And adventofcode.com will get you all the information that you're looking for. Or if you're an experienced Elixir person, there's a lot of cool ways that you can integrate with other languages like Zig and Ziggler. That would be a really cool exercise. Or Rust and Rustler, another cool exercise. There's all sorts of languages out there, and now's the season for learning. While undoubtedly, hopefully for you, your work environment is hopefully giving you a break because it's the seasons. And so a lot of folks kind of like disappear for a little bit. So use that time, maybe that extra time that you might have to go check out and learn a new language. Yeah. Anyway, Advent of Code is just a very, very creative way of presenting problems and submitting the solutions for those problems. It's just really nifty. And if you want to learn more about that, go to adventofcode.com and you'll find all about it.
And that's it for the news. Today, we're being joined by our special guest, Gonzalo Rodriguez. Gonzalo, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So we are going to be talking about a project called Tower. I think we've actually mentioned it in the news before, but Tower is an interesting project that gives you your application one place to send error notifications, and then Tower can be like that. I don't know. It's like the control tower to be able to send it off to one or multiple other systems, like be it Sentry or email notifications or things like that. And I think that's a really cool thing because it makes it so my application doesn't change my code when I want to target a different error notification system. I want to go from Sentry to, I don't know, what's another one?
Rollbar.
Rollbar, yeah, it's perfect. I'm not having my application code changing for that. So yeah, I'm excited to talk to you about that, like where this came from, what you can do with it. But before we get into all of that, I'd love to hear a little bit more about you. Like, where do you live and what kind of work are you doing?
I live in Uruguay, beautiful small country in South America, between big brothers, Brazil and Argentina. And I've been doing software engineering for 14 years. First 10 years focused on Ruby on Rails mostly. And the last 4 made a switch to Elixir and Phoenix. And yeah, still happy going this path. Wore many hats in those 14 years, not only software development. And I work a lot of those years remotely for US company, either as a consultant through Uruguayan companies, or full-time directly, and open source enthusiast. And I've been the author and maintainer of a few Ruby and Elixir projects over the years. In Ruby, most popular maybe Rack Attack. I maintain from 2017 to last year, and in Elixir more recently I've been working on some open source projects. Currently, I'm work for a Uruguayan company, Mimicwait, which is focused on Elixir and JavaScript. Currently, for the last year and a half, I've been focusing on helping push forward some internal projects. So Mimicwait is a consultancy for the US companies, and I've been focusing on Mimicwait's own projects, some product development, and also open source projects. So that's currently my focus, trying to bring my experience to help push some of the company-owned initiatives.
Nice. Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about, you mentioned about 4 years ago, you transitioned into Elixir. I was curious, what drove that interest and how did that shift go? Was that difficult? Going from object-oriented Ruby, you have Elixir, similar-ish syntax, and what was that like?
Yeah, I at the moment I was already 10 years into Ruby on Rails. I really loved it, but I guess it was just that I wanted to try out something different, and naturally some friends and some previous coworkers were into Elixir, and so just it felt natural to try it out. And yeah, the syntax is similar, but yeah, behind the scenes really different. So it was there was obviously some ramp up. The learning curve at first it was a bit steep, but yeah, I in general I like to go deep into understanding things. So it took me a while, but I tried to really understand how things work. So I ended up buying some books, reading Elixir in Action, programming Erlang also. After those, I kind of have a sense that I kind of understood how things work behind the scenes. So, but it's interesting how it feels similar on the surface, but conceptually behind the scenes, how things work and how you need to design your applications is conceptually very different. So it took me some time to reason differently as I was working or starting an application from scratch or understanding code. Very interesting, but very challenging, which is fun and exciting.
Well, I'm looking forward to talking more about Tower now. So maybe you could give us the high level the picture, the introduction of what is Tower? Is it a product? Is it a SaaS? Is it an open source project? Like, what is it?
Tower is a project that solves exception tracking for Elixir applications. It does that by providing the Tower package and a bunch of reporter packages that are separate from Tower. So Tower focuses on capturing exceptions within an Elixir application, and the reported packages actually report those exceptions to different destinations.
Right. Yeah. So when you look at the Tower project, it has a list of all these other reporter separate GitHub repo projects. So one of them I just wanted to highlight is called Tower Email, Tower_email. And that's a email sending when an error is encountered, and it sends it using Swoosh. And I used it with Postmark because that's the demo was actually set up with Postmark, and that happened to be what I was using too. And so it was painless. So I was like, oh, super easy email notifications that there was a problem. One of the things I really want to highlight up front is that Tower lets you link or chain multiple together, multiple reporters. So I can say, when this error happens, I want it to go to I want to get an email notification. I want it to go into the ErrorTracker library separately into my own, applications, Postgres database. And I want it to go to Slack. And so you can just have multiple reporters set up for notifications. And I think that right there is a really cool feature.
What we tried to do was one of the main things that I think makes Tower tiny bit different from other projects on the exception tracking space is this idea of decoupling the capturing from the notification or the reporting of the exception. Given that decoupling is when we realized that we could provide this potential value of someone wanting to report to multiple destinations, just supporting that without any problems. The current alternative, I guess, could be using a few libraries, but I suppose you would need to be careful in how those are capturing for you, and that they don't step into each other. So one core idea of building Tower this way and designing it this way was trying to separate concerns and get the value out of that, of having the capture done once and as well as best as possible, and then the other concern of reporting to different systems and with the specific coupling of the destination API, or whether it's an HTTP REST API, or whether it's the database or it's Slack, those concerns and the coupling with those systems go into different packages. So the core idea was, I think, that in trying to provide a different option, not necessarily better or than others, but just a different option in which you could just solve the capturing of the exception this way and not be coupled to vendors or to local implementation. Or I think that's the core idea, the value proposition of this library that could fit the need of some application companies, users, maybe not for others. That's okay. That's what's the beauty of open source.
Yeah. So you described a number of different of the reporters and how the reporters it's like an adapter, right? Like you're saying, we have the error tracking, which goes through the main library, and then you can configure one or more reporters, and you even support the ability to have custom reporters. And there's a project or documentation around how do I create a custom reporter. What might that look like? Help people get an idea of, maybe I want it to go into Discord. Maybe I want it to go into a system that isn't supported already out of the box.
What the Tower package does, what we call the core package, it's taking care of the capturing through the login system, listening for exceptions, all that stuff. Each of either an exception or an uncaught throw or an abnormal exit, it transforms that into, it gives all those exceptions common shape in that it builds Tower event struct with some fields, and it calls a reporter function, and it calls the handle event function on a reporter. So if you are implementing a custom reporter, what you need to do is implement the reporter behavior, and which only has one required callback, which is the handle event callback. And you know that you are receiving one argument, which is the Tower event with the known fields. From that point forward, you do what you are pleased with that event struct, with the exception, the module or the message, potentially metadata like the plug connection if this exception is within a plug call.
Nice. The
division between the capturing and the reporting. So from that point forward, all the reporters are more concerned about HTTP requests or writing to the database. So that's kind of the line between the separation of concerns.
Yeah, and I like that they're separate projects because, I'm not going to be doing the Slack integration in this project, so I don't want that code being loaded in or anything. But one of the things I think is really fun about this is, like, I was using ErrorTracker. So ErrorTracker, we've mentioned before, is a project that's it's a package that you load into your own application, and it does error tracking locally in your own Postgres database. But that doesn't have any external notifications. It doesn't have any email or Slack or anything like that. And so using Tower, I was able to say, oh, I want to be proactively notified with an email. And then it also goes into the ErrorTracker to be stored so I can review it and resolve it later. Just having that ability to couple those two things together, that's a product, right? Like, that's something you would normally pay for someone to do for you. It's like, oh, I can have that like very easily. So I love that.
So back when I was working for some agencies, I know that there were some common, software that we'd have to get up and running for commonly startups, right? And I've always found it to be kind of a difficult conversation to have with startups. It's like, okay, yes, you've hired me to help build a thing. It's going to be X amount of dollars, but also you need 10 software SaaS subscriptions, right? To have any observability, you need to have some, Datadog for the exception stuff. You need to have Sentry, all these things. You always have your recommendation list. And that conversation I found to be a little bit difficult sometimes. A lot of clients can understand, and some of them start off cheap. But I'm curious to why Tower was built. I can appreciate the telemetry kind of interface to handling exceptions here, which I think is very much needed. We can talk about that in a couple of minutes, but I'm also curious if localizing exception tracking wasn't only for security reasons, but also budgeting reasons, or just easier to not have that conversation with a bunch of clients about signing up for a bunch of SaaS products, right? That would only really ultimately be used by, the software team, I guess. Tell me why Tower came about to help with what Mimiquate and yourself, what you guys were doing.
Yeah, we were, as I was saying previously, I'm focusing on open source, but also on some product development. And we at Mimiquate, we do have a small subscription-based software product, which is a Slack application or Slack plugin, you may call it, to create polls and service, which is called Just Polls, and it's built with Phoenix. It's a Phoenix application. We have that in production for a while, and we were using rollbar for exception tracking. Most popular rollbar client for Elixir, which is rollbacks. And as time went on in last year, I think it was, we were upgrading Elixir to the latest to 115, 116, and we started realizing that because the logger in Elixir was upgraded to the new OTP logger, there were some issues with the rollbacks, and some errors were not coming through, were not being reported, and there's an issue in the issue tracker still there. And so we had to solve that in some way. So that was the kind of a trigger of trying to see what we can do to fix that, the capturing of exceptions in the library. And as we went deeper, we realized that it kind of needed quite a few refactors. So we start seeing if we could write it for ourselves. That went into realizing that as we were trying to solve the capturing of exceptions, that some of the early prototypes that we made with that, nothing that we were writing was specific to rollbar. It was capturing exceptions in Elixir and in OTP and details that are coupled with Erlang, and how OTP and Erlang handles errors and how it logs that through the logger system. At the same time, we realized that other libraries that reported to external services also had that problem, that they were behind in upgrading how capturing needed to work with the newer Elixir versions. So at that point, we realized we thought, if we solve capturing once and we report separately, maybe we can solve this for many third-party systems at the same time. That was the spark of kind of realizing that maybe it's worth pushing for a different approach to exception tracking, in which we build capturing just once and we report separately, and we don't implement capturing in every library that reports to separate places. So that was kind of it started with that, but then it kind of became its own thing. Like we believe in providing this alternative and trying to see how far it could go. At the moment, we thought maybe we will realize that this is not doable because of X or Y, but it kept going, and and we ended up with several reporters and even other people implementing a reporter for Telegram. That happened a few weeks ago. Someone just implemented its own reporter, and it's a package that's released on XPM. Yeah, it started with the rollbar client trying to solve that, but it took it a life of its own after we realized that the decoupling of capturing from reporting would be an idea worth pursuing, and for the community in general, like providing that alternative.
Yeah, gotcha. So it's less about the budget and then getting that conversation of like startups generally to pay for anything. It's more of that we want that common interface with pluggable backends, kind of like what OpenTelemetry is doing, but in this case, more about exception reporting. It's not actually specific to exception reporting in the strict sense of like Honey Badger, Sentry, Rollbar. All these have exception, metrics. I guess I don't know what to call them. Just handling exceptions, I guess. But more generic, because some folks don't really even want that. They just have their own little Slack channel and just post it over there. It doesn't need to conform to a real format here. I just need to be notified where I am and where I'm listening, hence the Telegram one as well, which is really sweet. I do love that idea. That's really cool, and I wonder how this will end up intersecting with an effort like OpenTelemetry. Have you guys done any investigation there? Because I know when you say the word telemetry, that means a million things to folks, right? Telemetry has like at least 3 aspects to it. It started with just metrics, little points of time measurements, right? Now it's also including traces, which was like a harder thing to do. And then logs are part of telemetry as well. I'm not aware of them tackling things like exceptions and how that might conceptually differ from a trace either. So yeah, what are your thoughts on that? How does this intersect with something like OpenTelemetry?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did poke briefly into the OpenTelemetry Erlang repository and OpenTelemetry Erlang contrib repository also. And as of now, they are actually reporting exceptions to the OpenTelemetry collector, I think it's called. If you are using OpenTelemetry, I think you will get the traces display, and you get some within the trace. You will see some points in the graph stating that there was an exception as part of this trace or span.
Right. It's just a couple of extra attributes marking that as an exception, right?
Yes, it is working that way. I did play with that a bit, and I think for Elixir currently, uncut throws are not being reported as exceptions for OpenTelemetry Erlang. But I saw that a small discussion on the Elixir on the GitHub repo, but it didn't went too far right now. But I may delve into that more in the future.
Well, one of the things you mentioned about the reason you went about creating this was Rollbar was the service you were using, and they were not quite keeping up with the changes in the Elixir framework, the Elixir language itself, and the problems that presented for you. And I think that's an interesting perspective there, because you have like, AppSignal, Honeybadger, Sentry, Rollbar. Their service is, hey, we do all this tracking and notifications and everything. And we just have to hook into all these other applications. And Elixir is special in some ways. And because it's concurrency and parallelism, and because you have plug exceptions and you have gen server exceptions and different ways that things can happen, that they may not have the best way to hook into that, right? Each one of these vendors doesn't have the best library support for Elixir, perhaps. And then you're saying, hey, if we provide that middle piece, like we can just get the errors out of Elixir because we know Elixir. And then we can either provide community created clients to Sentry or Rollbar or Honeybadger or whatever, or, maybe the developers who work at these other services, they can create one that's a tower plugin just to make that easier for them. It's like, we want to have good options in Elixir. And that leads me to my next question, really, because like Elixir can be a little bit hard to get errors out of, because there's a lot of different ways errors can happen. I was curious to hear about some of those. You mentioned like if there's a plug call, there's errors in context that comes with that. And then there's supervised gen servers, unsupervised processes. Like, what is it like trying to collect these errors?
Yeah, just a small clarification that in the case of Rollbar, the company that isn't the author of the Rollbacks library, it was an effort of Forza, I think the company, Forza Football. So in the case of Rollbar, it wasn't even an official library that was out there. It was the great work of people from Forza that they tried to support that, which we appreciate very much. And we know how hard it is to keep up, to support endlessly open source libraries. I feel that it happened to me with some projects. So yeah, it's not to poke on the Rollbacks library. It's just that it happens in software, that, and the idea of trying to make it so that it's easier to maintain in the future. But so back to your question, yes, yeah, it's very interesting. And back to the comparison of Ruby and Elixir, the fact that Erlang and Elixir in turn, it's naturally that concurrent, and which is a great thing.
Yeah, we love it.
We like that. it comes with that also, that capture, like listening to all the errors in these concurrent processes. It's potentially a bit harder than in other runtimes, but we implemented Tower built on top of the great work of the OTP team and the Elixir team in how they built the new logger system. The new logger module in OTP 21 and the integration that Elixir did with the OTP logger in Elixir 1.15, it made it possible to almost being able to listen all the exceptions everywhere. Just by defining what's called a logger handler. And that's what we did and what we are trying to push forward. What we're trying to do is to see how far we can get in implementing Tower just as a logger handler and capture errors with just that, not needing to hook into try-catch blocks in black holes or other places, and just put the ear on the logger system and just listening for log messages that have the shape of an exception. Is that mainly how it work, how we are making it work right now? But yeah, as I was saying, it's built on top of the great work of the OTP and the Elixir team, because without that new logger system would be very, very way more difficult.
I'd forgotten about that whole new logger system, because I remember I had previous to the OTP logger rewrite that came over into Elixir land too. And yeah, getting the logs out and formatted the way we needed to be done in this other system, that was a lot of work and it wasn't perfect. And then you had like SASL logs and those look completely different. Yeah, I guess I had not appreciated what also became possible when OTP had redone that logger system.
To clarify a bit, so through the logger system, of course, there's a lot of other events going on, but Elixir kind of standardized that any exception would be logged through the logger with a metadata key that is called a crash reason. And if that's present, that means that this is a log event that is the source of an exception somewhere, either on a task or a gen server, or potentially user code also. That's the main way right now of listening for errors on Elixir.
That's cool. So I could just do a logger message, and if I include that crash reason tag and maybe a custom stack trace if I want to, that would end up getting passed through to the reporters.
Yes.
That's cool.
Yeah. What we also need on top of the logger handler for Tower so far, it's an OBAN exception handler. It's what we call it. It's just a telemetry handler for OBAN telemetry events, because the way OBAN works is it performs jobs and it catches errors and just emits a telemetry event. It doesn't log into the logger system. So yeah, Tower has the logger handler and then a telemetry listener for OBAN errors. We did have one for Bandit also, because Bandit wasn't logging. It was logging errors through the logger system, but it didn't include the metadata value, the metadata key value with the crash reason and the connection value. So we contributed to Bandit to improve that, and it was released on Bandit 1.6.0. Thanks for the great work from Matt Trudell on that. So from now on in Bandit 1, if you're using Bandit 1.6.0, you can use the latest Tower, and it will just be, those exceptions will be listened through the logger handler and not the Bandit telemetry handler.
Nice. If people want to get started with this, I was impressed with how easy the steps were to get started with on the README. And then you just choose which reporter you want to support, and you go look at that README of like, how do I integrate that one? I think it's super easy to get started with. Are there any tips or heads up for anyone who wants to start looking at adding this to their application?
just be aware that as you add this to your application, it will automatically start listening for errors. So that's the reason why you don't have to add anything additional to your code or use some module or in any place, because we are, as Tower starts as part of the application host application boot, we set up the handlers automatically, and if the reporters are configured, it will start reporting the errors. So yeah, just maybe to have into consideration that if you use as you use the reporter packages, you don't need to depend directly on Tower. It's just a transitive dependency. So
yeah,
that
true.
may be the source of confusion, maybe. But just to be clear that you include the reporter packages, and that just works, and it will work automatically. Then you can, as with any other similar libraries, just call Tower report exception or report message. You can manually report also in case you handle the errors and you want to manually report those. And give us feedback.
So when we first started tracking Tower, there was only like a one destination or two that it would report to. And now that we're looking at it now, like there's like 7 of them and a community contributed one. So, the project seems to be progressing pretty rapidly, so that's all pretty good news. I'm curious where, what is coming up next for Tower. Is there further integration with things like ErrorTracker or what other, we talked a little bit about OpenTelemetry, so I figured that something might end up happening there. What's coming next for the project?
What we want to work on next is better reporting of contextual information. That means your application is on a Phoenix action or a black hole, and you want to set up context or logger metadata or some contextual information, and any crash within that process, being able to report that information. We are in progress with that. Also, better handling of similar repeated events. This is a tricky thing I suppose for every library doing exception tracking. What is the best heuristics to group exceptions together or consider it separate? We have something for that, but we want to improve that quite a bit. And I want to also load test it and see how it responds to high traffic scenarios.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really cool. And is the project open to contributions from the community? Is this something where they could say, oh, I would really like to either create a custom reporter, or maybe I would like to help out with one of these features that's just part of an existing reporter or existing core package? Are you open to contributions?
Yes, of course. We will love contributions. At this point, any feedback of people using it and reporting back any issues that they have, or even just opening a GitHub discussion saying, hey, we use this reporter and it worked fine, or we switched to this and it worked, but we lost this feature and we would want this to also be included. Any feedback will be very useful right now. But of course, we are open to issue reports, feature requests, or pull requests.
I also wanted to point out that there is a blog post on the Mimiquate blog that's about Tower that helps introduce it and document some of this and show a little bit more off. So I think that's great. We'll have a link to that in the show notes. But if people want to get in touch with you or maybe follow you online, where should they go to do that?
I go by the handle GRC as in zebra UY. So you can find me in GitHub or X or Blue Sky recently.
Yep. Awesome. Well, Gonzalo, thank you so much for joining us to talk about Tower, the project you've been working on. And I'm so happy to see that it's been getting attention and additional features and reporters. Like I said, having the ability to support multiple reporters where I could just easily take the ErrorTracker package, which, separate thing, and then add email notification and add Slack notification and just stick that all into my own little project. I feel like that is like a SaaS service, right? Like it does the error tracking, does the collecting of the data, and it does notifications. That combo lets me resolve things. And it's all enabled because of Tower. So I really appreciate the work that you guys have put into this and making it open source, and Mimiquate supporting your time doing that. I think that's great. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you for listening. We hope you'll join us next time on Thinking Elixir.